Welcome to Romance Haven. Tonight's story begins with a storm, a lonely road through the Scottish Highlands, and a chance encounter that will change two lives forever. If you love unforgettable Regency romance filled with mystery, longing, and slow-burning love, you're in the right place. So settle in, relax, and let the story carry you away. Your escape into romance awaits. Happy listening. Lost in the Highlands, Chapter 1. The coachman had been wrong about the pass. Cecily Vane knew it the moment the road narrowed to a dirt track and the pines closed in on either side like a set of teeth. She had said nothing at the time. She had learned, over 3 years of widowhood, that saying, "I believe you are mistaken," to a man who has just declared himself absolutely certain tends to produce only a longer declaration of his certainty. So she had held her tongue, and now the coach was listing sideways into a ditch that should not have existed, and the coachman was standing in the rain, looking at the wheel with the particular expression of a man who wishes he were someone else entirely. "How long?" she asked from the open door. He turned. He had the look of someone trying to determine whether to be honest or optimistic. "Could be morning, miss." Mrs. Vane, she thought, but did not say. She had also stopped correcting that. She stepped down onto the road, or what remained of it. The mud took her boot immediately, sucking at the heel, and overhead the sky had turned the yellow-grey of a bruise preparing itself. This was not English rain, soft and apologetic. This was Scottish rain. It had intentions. She retrieved her satchel from the interior before the coachman could protest, slung it across her body, and looked at the road ahead. 2 options presented themselves: wait in a drifting coach while a storm arrived in earnest, or walk the half-mile to the village she'd spotted on the ridge before the road had gone treacherous. She was not particularly brave, and she was not particularly foolish, but she had been both wet and cold before, and she had never once improved her situation by waiting for someone else to improve it first. "I am going to Lochmuir," she said. "You will send the luggage when the wheel is repaired." The coachman's mouth opened. She was already walking. The path through the trees was better footing than the road, which she suspected said something unflattering about the road. The rain had not yet decided to commit, but it was rehearsing. Cold drops finding the gap between her bonnet and her collar, the hem of her travelling coat beginning to drag. She focused on the track. She had learned that skill, too, in the year after Edmund died. Focus on the 3 feet in front of you, then the next 3, and do not look at the whole of the distance you need to travel. She was doing precisely this, head down, attention fixed on a route she was about to navigate, when she walked into something large and solid and decidedly not a tree. She stumbled back. A hand caught her arm before she hit the ground, firm and sudden, and she found herself looking up into a face she didn't know. Her first impression was rain-dark hair and a jaw that looked like it had been set there by someone in a particular mood. Her second was that he was looking at her the way a man looks at a problem he did not invite and cannot immediately solve. He released her arm the instant she had her footing. "You're on the wrong path," he said. "Not are you all right, not good God, are you lost?" Simply that, in the flat, declarative tone of someone who has no patience for anything other than relevant information. Cecily looked at the path she was standing on, and then at him. "I am on a path. The Lochmuir path." He said it the way she imagined he said most things, as a correction. "It ends at the gorge. The bridge has been out since March." She absorbed this. "Since March," she repeated. "Since March." She looked at the path again. He was right, she supposed. that it would have been useful to know earlier. Is there another way? Something moved in his expression, too quick to name. Where are you going? Lochmuir House. I am engaged to stay with Lady Dunmore. A pause, brief but there. I know Dunmore House. Then perhaps you know the road. The road, he said, with something she would later identify as the ghost of a thought he decided against voicing, is currently occupied by your coach. I saw it from the ridge. She looked at him. He was large, broad-shouldered under a coat that had been expensive some years ago, soaked through at the shoulders now. He held himself with the particular stillness of a man who was accustomed to being the most formidable thing in whatever space he occupied, and had somewhere along the way stopped needing to prove it. His eyes were grey and sharp, and they were, she realized, conducting a very thorough assessment of her at the same moment she was conducting one of him. Neither of them was being subtle about it. Crispin Gale, he said, after a moment. Of Kinlochmore. She had not heard of it. Cecily Vane, she said. Of nowhere convenient. His gaze shifted, fractionally, barely, and she had the odd sensation of having surprised him, though his face conceded nothing. The storm will be here within the hour, he said. There is a shepherd's bothy a quarter-mile east. It will do until the rain passes. And you know this because? Because I am standing on my own land, and I have eyes. She considered him for a moment. The rain had committed now. Proper rain, landing in the pine needles with a sound like scattered applause. She thought about Edmund, who had died leaving her £300, a house she could not afford, and a talent for surviving situations she should not have been in. She thought about the gorge she could apparently not see from here, but presumably existed. Quarter-mile east, she said. Follow the deer track. I'll go first. You'll go first, she repeated, so that I can either follow you toward shelter or watch you disappear into the trees and draw my own conclusions. He looked at her again. It was not an unkind look. It was a look that was doing something she could not quite interpret, recalibrating, perhaps, or filing something away. Or, he said, because there are roots. He turned. He did not look back to see if she would follow. She followed. The bothy was small and dry, and smelled of old peat smoke and wool. He got a fire going with an efficiency that suggested he had done it many times before in many worse conditions, and she stood with her back to him and wrung out her bonnet strings and did not look at the way the firelight shifted when he moved. She had survived Edmund. She had survived the debts he left, the actual debts, tallied in her own careful hand in a ledger she kept locked in her satchel. She had survived 2 seasons of well-meaning friends who wanted to remarry her to someone suitable, and 1 season of less well-meaning ones who had other ideas entirely. She was not fragile. She did not need to be managed or sheltered or guided through trees. She also, she thought with what she considered admirable honesty, had not been looked at like that in rather a long time. Like what, exactly? She could not have said. He had barely looked at her at all, really. He had been extremely efficient and brusque, and entirely focused on practical concerns. And yet. She pulled the ledger from her satchel and opened it across her knee, because she had correspondence to review and plans that required revising, and she was absolutely not, going to sit in a small fire-lit room thinking about a stranger's jaw. Across the bothy, he settled against the far wall with his arms crossed, apparently entirely comfortable in silence. The fire crackled between them. Outside, the storm arrived. Chapter 2. He had not intended to go to the eastern ridge at all. He had intended to check the fence line at the lower pasture, speak to Fergus about the drainage problem near the south field, and return to Kinlochmore before the weather turned. 3 tasks. Straightforward. He had been managing his own land for 6 years without incident, and he was not a man who got lost or delayed or diverted from a clear plan. And then he had crested the ridge and seen a woman walking into the gorge path with the purposeful stride of someone who had no idea there was no longer a bridge at the end of it. He had called out. She had not heard him over the wind. So he had gone after her. And now he was sitting in a bothy in the middle of a storm with a woman named Cecily Vane, who was reading a ledger with the focused intensity of someone daring the room to distract her. He was looking at the fire. He was also, and he was aware of this with a specificity he found irritating, aware of every sound she made. The soft turn of a page, the small exhalation when she found something that displeased her. He had heard it twice now, that almost silent exhale through her nose, and both times he had not looked up. The scratch of her pencil when she made a note. She had walked into him on the path and grabbed his coat for 1/2 second before she found her footing and let go. Her hand had landed just below his left shoulder. He was still aware of exactly where. This was not useful information. He had grown very good, over the years, at sorting information into categories. Useful and not useful. It was how he had managed when his father's debts came due the year Crispin turned 23. It was how he had rebuilt Kinlochmore from a house that was quietly collapsing into an estate that functioned. Sentiment was not useful. Distraction was not useful. A widow on her way to Dunmore House with a locked satchel and a dry, precise manner that he had not expected. He stopped that thought and put it in the correct category. She had said, of nowhere convenient, and he had felt something shift in his chest that he had no intention of examining. He looked at the fire. The thing was, and he was only acknowledging this because it was relevant to the situation and therefore technically useful. She was not what he had assumed. He had seen a woman walking alone in the rain toward a gorge, and he had assumed helplessness. It was a reasonable assumption. Most people were helpless on that path without local knowledge. He had been prepared for tears or alarm, or at minimum a considerable amount of gratitude. Instead, she had said, "I am on a path," in a tone that suggested she found his correction mildly presumptuous. And then she had looked at the broken bridge situation with the expression of someone revising a plan rather than losing their composure. And then she had asked about the alternative route with the brisk efficiency of a woman who dealt with problems by solving them. He had stood there and watched her make the decision, and he had thought, against his own preferences, good. Which was neither here nor there. The pencil scratched again. Another exhale, sharper this time. He glanced at her before he could stop himself. She was frowning at the ledger, not the distressed frown of someone encountering bad news, the concentrated frown of someone who had found an error and was determining its source. Her finger moved down a column of figures, stopped, moved back up. She did not look up. She had no idea he was watching. He looked away. He had offered her the bothy because it was the practical solution, and because letting her walk into a Highland storm was not something he was willing to do, and for no other reason. He had not offered it because she had looked up at him from the ground with rain on her face and not been frightened. Not of the storm, not of the stranger who had appeared out of the trees, not of any of it. "You'll go first," she had said, "so that I can either follow you toward shelter or watch you disappear into the trees and draw my own conclusions." He had turned away before she could see that it almost made him smile. He hadn't smiled. He was clear on that. But the thing that happened just before, the thing he'd caught and put away, that had been close. He had not asked her about the ledger. It wasn't his concern. She was a widow of independent means, or some means, or means she was managing carefully, which amounted to the same conversation in a different register, and she was going to Dunmore House. And after this storm passed, he was going to walk her to the main road, and that would be the end of it. Kinlochmore needed his attention. The drainage situation. The fence. The very significant problem of the South Field, which he had not yet told his brother about, and was not looking forward to telling his brother about, because his brother would immediately suggest solutions that would cost money they did not have in the ways that Crispin had always insisted they would have it. And Crispin would have to sit across from Alastair and explain, again, why the responsible path required patience. He was a man who understood patience. The pencil stopped. "You're very quiet," she said. He did not look up from the fire. "I wasn't aware conversation was required." A pause. He could feel her deciding whether to be annoyed by this. "It isn't," she said, and went back to the ledger. That should have been the end of it. He had said the thing that ended conversations. He'd had years of practice, and she had accepted it without argument, which was exactly what he had intended. He looked at the fire for another 30 seconds. "What are you reading?" he said. The pencil stopped again. Longer pause this time. "Correspondence," she said. Then, apparently deciding something. "Figures. My late husband's estate accounts. There is a discrepancy in the quarterly tallies from 1814 that I have been attempting to locate for 6 months." She said it the way someone states a fact, not seeking sympathy, not explaining herself, just answering the question asked. He considered that. "Have you found it?" "Not yet." A dry note entered her voice. "The man who kept the books before me had a creative approach to column headings." Despite himself, Crispin said, "Column headings." "He would invent categories," she said, with a precision that suggested this was a wound she had been pressing on for some time. "Miscellaneous improvements, general contingencies, seasonal adjustments, none of which appear to correspond to any actual seasonal event or improvement or contingency I have been able to identify." He was quiet for a moment. "Hiding payments?" She looked up. For the first time since the bothy, they were looking at each other directly. She had brown eyes, he noticed. Not soft brown, but the particular dark, sharp brown of someone paying close attention. And she was looking at him with an expression he recognized because he had worn it himself. The look of someone who has been carrying a problem alone and has just heard someone else name it correctly. "That," she said carefully, "is what I suspect." He said nothing. He was very aware of having said more in the last 2 minutes than he'd intended to say, and of the fact that he had asked the question that led here, and of the fact that he did not, actually, want the conversation to stop. He looked at the fire. "The figures from the spring quarter," he said, after a moment. "If the total draws match a pattern across multiple years, it's not error. Error is irregular." Silence. Then, "I know." Her voice had shifted. Quieter. "I know." Outside, the storm hammered the roof. The fire burned between them, and Crispin Gale sat with his arms crossed and looked at nothing in particular, and thought about a woman who walked toward gorges without flinching and kept a locked ledger and had not once, asked him to fix anything for her. He thought about Dunmore House, which was 3 miles from Kinlochmore. He thought about the South Field and the drainage problem and all the very reasonable things that required his attention. He put those thoughts in the correct category. Then, without particular success, he tried to leave them there. Chapter 5. She had expected something austere, a man like Crispin Gale, terse, contained, who parcelled out words like a man who had costed them, would live somewhere that matched. Stone. Functional. Nothing excessive. She had built the picture of it during the walk through the North Woods, the light dropping gold through the pines, him walking beside her in the particular silence that had stopped feeling like withholding and started feeling like weather. Simply, what was there? So she was not prepared for Kinlochmore. It came into view as they crested the ridge. A long, low house of pale grey stone, 3 stories at the centre with wings extending on either side, the kind of proportions that had been conceived with ambition and built with genuine craft. The windows were tall and even. The entrance front had a shallow portico with columns that had been, once, elegant. The whole of it sat against the hillside like something that had grown there, and in the gold evening light it was— She found the word before she could stop herself. Beautiful. Then she looked more carefully. The east wing's roof had lost slates. She could see the patchwork repairs, mismatched stone and timber, the expedient corrections of someone buying time against the weather. The portico columns had been repointed recently with mortar that didn't quite match the original. One of the ground floor windows on the left wing was boarded from the inside. The formal garden directly before the entrance had been cleared and planted with kitchen vegetables, rows of winter brassicas, the orderly practicality of someone who had looked at decorative roses and made a decision. She stood on the ridge and looked at all of it. She had made the same calculations once, standing in the doorway of her own house after Edmund died, totalling the cost of what was wrong against the cost of what was necessary, and working out what could wait and what could not. The kitchen vegetables were a very specific decision, the decision of someone who understood the hierarchy of need. He had stopped a few feet away, facing the house. He was not looking at her. "The north path continues past the garden wall," he said. "It joins the Dunmore Lane about half a mile on." "Yes," she said. She did not move. A pause. "You're looking at the roof," he said. "I'm looking at the house." "The east wing is sound," he said. "The slates are cosmetic. I've got the drainage managed." She turned to look at him. He was still facing forward, jaw set, and she recognized it. The posture of someone explaining themselves before they've been accused of anything. The reflex of a person who has had to justify the state of things too many times to wait for the question. "I wasn't criticizing it," she said. He looked at her then. "It's a good house," she said, and she meant it the way she meant things. Precisely, without embellishment. "Someone built it well. You can see the bones of it." Something in his face did not quite move. He looked back at the house. "My grandfather," he said. "And the kitchen garden." A beat. The roses weren't earning anything. "No," she agreed. "They wouldn't." They stood in silence for a moment, both looking at the house, and Cecily thought about the boarded window and the patched roof and the rows of winter brassicas and the fence with the rotted posts and the £30 that were not currently available, and she felt something that she was honest enough to name and sensible enough to be frustrated by. She did not want to help from pity. Pity was condescending and useless, and she had been on the receiving end of enough of it to know precisely how little it accomplished. This was not pity. This was something more like recognition. The particular feeling of seeing another set of books and knowing immediately the shape of the problem. Which was worse? Pity could be set aside. Recognition had a way of persisting. He took her through the house. She was not sure afterwards when she had agreed to this. It had happened in the same way the practical path had happened. A statement that carried the grammatical shape of practicality and the actual substance of something else. And she had agreed before examining it too closely, and then she had been inside Kinlochmore. The entrance hall was clean and cold and smelled of beeswax and old stone. A wide staircase rose at the far end, with a wrought-iron banister that had been polished recently. She could see the cloth marks. The floors were bare stone, the carpets presumably long-soled. But someone had placed a narrow runner in the hall that was old and slightly worn, and had been chosen, she thought, to make the space feel inhabited rather than merely maintained. A woman came out of a door to the left, middle-aged, neat, with the expression of a woman who had seen a great deal and adjusted her expectations accordingly. "Mrs. Gillies," he said. "Mrs. Vane. She's going on to Dunmore House. I'm showing her the north path." Mrs. Gillies looked at Cecily with the rapid, thorough assessment of a housekeeper who has been protecting a household for decades. Cecily looked back with equal directness. "I'll put the kettle on," Mrs. Gillies said, and went back through the door. Crispin looked mildly as though he'd meant to prevent this and had been too slow. "She doesn't need to," he started. "I would like tea," Cecily said. He closed his mouth. The kitchen was warm and smelled of something with herbs, and Mrs. Gillies produced tea and oatcakes with the efficiency of a woman who had been managing a household on restricted means for long enough to have made an art of it. Cecily sat at the kitchen table. He had started to steer toward what she assumed was a formal room, and she had simply sat down in the kitchen because the kitchen was warm, and she had spent the last day and a half in a peat-scented bothy, and she was not standing on ceremony. And Mrs. Gillies sat across from her and told her, in the blunt, informational way of someone who had no patience for indirection, that the East Wing roof would hold another season, that Master Alasdair was in Edinburgh until December, and that the young laird had been working the fence line himself since Robbie McAllister's boy broke his arm in August. Cecily looked at him. He was leaning against the kitchen doorframe with the expression of a man who had made a significant tactical error in allowing her access to Mrs. Gillies. "The fence," she said. "The fence," he confirmed flatly. "You've been doing it yourself?" "Some of it." "How much of it?" A pause. "Most of it." She held his gaze for a moment. He met it without flinching, because he never flinched from anything, she was learning, but there was something different in the set of his face now. Not embarrassed. Not quite. Something closer to the expression of a man bracing himself for a particular kind of response he had received before and found useless. She turned back to her tea. "The mortar on the portico columns," she said. "You did that too." "The original needed matching. There's a quarry at Braymore that supplies—" "I know," she said. "I can see it. It's a good match." A silence. Mrs. Gillies, to her credit, found something to look at on the far side of the kitchen. Cecily wrapped her hands around her tea and looked at the surface of it and thought about 128 pounds of recovered ground, and about 3 pages cut from a ledger with a small blade, and about a man who had been working fence posts alone since August because his labourer broke his arm and the 30 pounds were not currently available. She thought about the solicitor, or the brother, or whoever had removed those pages from Edmund's accounts in March of 1815. She thought about the fact that she was going to find them, and she thought, which was the thought she had been managing since the ridge, keeping it at the edge where she could monitor it without looking directly at it, that she had approximately half a mile of North Path left before she walked out of Kinlochmore and went to Dunmore House and became once again a widow with a locked satchel and a manageable life, and that after this morning she understood rather precisely how manageable that life was going to feel. She looked up. He was still in the doorway. He was watching her with the focused stillness she had come to understand was not blankness, but attention. The concentrated regard of a man who was tracking something he had decided was worth tracking. She should stand up. She should thank Mrs. Gillies and pick up her satchel and walk the half-mile to the Dunmore Lane. She looked at him and thought, with complete clarity, "I do not want to go." She did not say it. She had not taken leave of all her faculties. But she thought it, and she held it, and she did not look away from it. "The path," she said. "Yes," he said. She stood. She picked up her satchel. She thanked Mrs. Gillies, who pressed 2 oatcakes wrapped in cloth into her hands without being asked, and she followed him back through the hall with the worn runner and the beeswax cold, and out through the door into the evening that had gone rose gold and enormous across the hills. He walked her to the garden wall. He showed her where the north path joined the lane, where the footing was soft, where the crossing stone sat above the burn. He stopped at the wall. "Half a mile," he said. "You'll see the Dunmore gates before the light goes." "I know," she said. She looked at him. He looked back. The hills behind him were doing something extravagant with the last of the light, all that Highland gold, and he stood against it with his arms at his sides for once, not crossed, and she thought that he looked like the house, like something that had been built with genuine craft and was still, despite everything, holding. "Thank you," she said, "for the roof and the kitchen and—" She stopped, started again, "for the ledger, for January." He said nothing for a moment. Then, "You would have found it. Eventually, you would have found it," he said again, with a certainty that was not reassurance, but assessment. "You were already close." She looked at him for one moment longer than she should have. Then she turned and walked the north path, and did not look back, because she was a practical woman, and practical women did not look back at things they could not yet name. She looked back once. He was still at the wall. Chapter 6. The post went in crooked. Crispin looked at it. He had set 41 posts in the last 3 days, and not one of them had gone in crooked, because he was a methodical man, and he dug the holes to the correct depth, and he packed them correctly, and there was no reason, no structural reason, for the post to be sitting at that angle. He took it out, dug another 2 inches, set it again, straight. He moved to the next hole. The problem was not the fence posts. He was aware of this. He had been aware of it since approximately the morning after she left, when he had come downstairs to find Mrs. Gillies making porridge with the particular expression of a woman who had decided to say nothing and was making her decision felt throughout the kitchen. He had eaten the porridge. He had gone to the fence. He had been coming back to the fence every morning since, because the fence needed doing, and because doing it required the kind of physical attention that left insufficient room for other things. This was not working as well as he had intended. He had not thought about her during the first hour. He was clear on that. He had been thinking about post spacing and the correct gauge of wire for this section of the boundary, and whether the southwest corner would need a brace post before winter. Then he had found the place where the track from the north path crossed the fence line, and he had noticed, without looking for it, that the soft ground still held the impression of a boot. The narrow heel, the walking stride of someone who moved with purpose and didn't scuff. And he had been standing there looking at it for what he estimated was longer than was useful before he caught himself and moved on. That had been day 1. Day 2, he had been pulling wire and thinking about the south field drainage, which was what he should have been thinking about. And the thought had arrived without invitation. At current timber prices. Her voice, the precise way she'd stopped herself mid-calculation, the small flicker of awareness when she'd looked at him and said, "I'm sorry, that's not my concern." As though she'd reached for something and pulled her hand back before he noticed. He had noticed. He drove a staple into a post with more force than it required. Day 3. Today. He had made it to mid-morning before the problem surfaced, which he was choosing to regard as progress. He had been doing well. He had set 12 posts, his mind appropriately occupied with gradients and ground conditions, and then a hawk had come off the ridge to the north, and his eyes had followed it, and he had looked, entirely by accident, at the line of the north path as it came down from the Kinlochmore boundary toward the Dunmore Lane. He had stood there for a full minute before he moved. This was not useful. He was a man who understood that wanting something that was not available to him was simply a logistical problem, not a philosophical one. And logistical problems were resolved by accurate assessment of resources and a clear-eyed plan. He had employed this approach to his father's debts. He had employed it to the roof and the drainage and the east wing and the 12 years of accumulated difficulty that had constituted his adult life. It had always worked because he had always been right about what was and was not available to him. She was a widow going to Dunmore House. She had her own ledger, her own problem, her own particular form of managed solitude that she carried the way he carried his, upright, without complaint, without requiring anyone to notice the weight of it. She was staying at Dunmore House for the autumn, presumably, before returning to wherever her life was. England, most likely. The south. Somewhere with better roads and a house she was fighting to keep. He picked up the next post. The specific things he kept returning to, and he was going to inventory them once, clearly, and then stop, were as follows. The way she had held the ledger up to the bothy window, 2 hands, steady, the grey light coming through and showing the cut edges, and the expression on her face not distress but calculation. The decision she had made, right then, in the space of 30 seconds, to tell him what she had found. She had not dressed it up, or asked permission, or softened it. She had simply crossed the room and shown him, with the directness of someone who had decided he was worth the honesty. He did not know what to do with having been found worth the honesty. He had been worth a great many things to a great many people over the years. He had been worth relying on, worth managing things, worth the significant and ongoing effort of Kinlochmore and Alasdair, and the debts and the roof and the fence. He was useful and capable and steady, and those were the things that were required of him, and he provided them without complaint, because they were, in fact, required. She had not required any of them. She had sat in his kitchen and wrapped her hands around tea she hadn't asked for, and looked at the surface of it with an expression he could not have described to anyone, but would have recognized in the dark, and she had said, about the house he had been holding together for 6 years, "It's a good house. You can see the bones of it." Like the house was not a problem to be assessed and managed, but a thing that deserved to be seen for what it had been, not just what it currently was. He drove the next staple in with precise, measured force. The hawk came off the ridge again. He did not watch it. Fergus found him at the south corner at midday, which meant Fergus had walked the fence line specifically to find him, which meant there was news. "Letter from the village," Fergus said, and held out an envelope. Crispin looked at the handwriting, not anyone he recognised. He turned it over. The seal was Dunmore's. He opened it with a fence tool because he did not have a letter knife, which was the kind of thing that happened when you spent your mornings in a field. Inside, a single sheet, a short note in a small, precise hand he had not seen before but recognized. The hand of a woman who had been writing columns of figures for years, and whose writing had taken on the particular character of someone accustomed to needing every word to be legible and mean exactly what it said. Mr. Gale, I have found a fourth entry. November 1815, 5 months after Edmund's death. Whatever access was required, it did not end with him. I thought you should know, as you were the one who showed me where to look. I also thought, though this is less defensible, that I would like to tell you. C. Vane. He read it twice. The second time he was aware of the last 2 lines with a specificity that had nothing to do with the information they contained. I thought you should know. The first sentence was practical. The second sentence was the one she had nearly not written. He could see the pause before it, the slight increase in pressure on the paper, and had written anyway. I would like to tell you, not. I felt obliged, not. It seemed relevant. She had used the word like, which was a word she would not have used accidentally, and she had called it less defensible, which meant she had looked at it and called it by its right name and sent it regardless. He folded the letter, put it in his coat pocket. He looked at the fence. He looked at the north path. He looked at the 11 posts he still had to set before dark. He took the letter out, read the last 2 lines once more, put it back. Fergus had the expression of a man who had seen enough of life to know when to look at the middle distance. Right, Crispin said. He picked up the post. Get the far end, will you? Fergus took the end of the wire without comment. They worked in silence. The hawk did not come back. The afternoon light went flat and grey across the hills, and Crispin set posts 11, 12, 13, with the precision of a man whose hands were occupied and whose mind was entirely elsewhere, and he did not pretend otherwise, not even to himself. For the first time he could not remember how long. He wrote the reply that evening at the kitchen table with Mrs. Gillies conspicuously occupied at the far end of the room. He started it 3 times. The first version told her to document the November entry carefully and secure a copy with her solicitor before approaching Edmund's brother. Accurate. Useful. The kind of thing he was good at producing. He looked at it. He thought about less defensible. He started again. Mrs. Vane, document the November entry and secure a copy before you move on the brother. You'll want a second witness to the pattern. 3 consecutive years, plus a posthumous entry is strong, but a witness makes it unassailable. The practical advice above is the reason I am writing. The other reason is that I found myself wanting to know if you were well, and if the work was going forward, and whether the house at Dunmore suits you. These are less defensible questions, and I am asking them regardless. C. Gale. He read it. He folded it before he could revise it further, addressed it to Dunmore House, and left it on the hall table for the Morning Post. He did not sleep particularly well. He did not, for once, find this worth cataloguing. Chapter 7. Lady Dunmore had opinions about widows. Specifically, she had opinions about widows who had been widowed young and had not yet resolved the situation by remarrying someone appropriate. And she expressed these opinions in the warm, relentless way of a woman who believed that her concern for others entitled her to the full scope of their lives. "There is Lord Ferris," she said at breakfast on the 4th morning, in the tone of someone producing a solution. "He is 53, very steady, excellent property in Perthshire. His first wife was a particular friend of mine. He has been looking." Cecily spread butter on her bread with precise, even strokes. "Looking," she said. "For a wife. Someone sensible. He doesn't want another young girl. He was quite clear about that. Someone who understands management." Lady Dunmore looked at Cecily with the expression of a woman who felt she was connecting obvious things. "You understand management?" "I do," Cecily said. "Well then." She ate her bread. Outside the Dunmore house windows, the hills were doing something spectacular in the early light. All that Highland distance, purple and gold in layers she had not known hills could achieve before she came north. She had been watching them every morning. They were, she had decided, the best thing about her current situation, which was otherwise comfortable and warm and populated by a woman who meant very well and was slowly, inexorably, making the case for Lord Ferris of Perthshire. 53. Steady. Excellent property. She thought about Edmund, who had been 29 and charming, and had left her £300 and a house she couldn't afford, and £128 that someone had stolen, and 3 pages cut from a ledger with a small blade. Edmund had also been, she was honest enough to acknowledge, not unkind. Not unkind, and not particularly interested, which had turned out to be its own specific form of loneliness. The loneliness of a person who is present in the room and absent in every way that mattered. She had built her life very carefully after that. Small. Manageable. The ledger locked, the house maintained, the seasons attended with the specific armour of a woman who had decided that she knew now what marriage cost and what it provided, and had concluded that the exchange was not in her favour. It had been a reasonable conclusion. She stood by it. She was also aware, and had been aware with increasing sharpness since she had walked the north path to the Dunmore Lane 4 days ago, that the reasonable conclusion had been reached in the absence of certain data. The letter arrived after breakfast. She was in the library. Dunmore House had an excellent library, which was the second best thing about her current situation. With her ledger open and the 4th entry documented in her own hand, when the footman brought in a small silver tray with an envelope on it, the address in a hand she had not seen before, but recognized immediately. She looked at it for a moment. Then she picked it up. She read it twice. The practical section first. It was good advice, precise and correct, and exactly what she needed, the kind of information that would have taken her weeks to determine on her own. He had given it in 4 sentences. She would document it exactly as he said. Secure a copy. Find a witness before she moved on Edmund's brother Reginald. Then she read the second half. The other reason is that I found myself wanting to know if you were well, and if the work was going forward, and whether the house at Dunmore suits you. These are less defensible questions, and I am asking them regardless. She sat with this for a long moment. He had used her word back at her. Less defensible. He had read her letter, found the word she had used to flag the thing she was doing, and he had used it to flag the same thing in himself. That was not accidental. That was a man who read carefully and responded in kind, which she had known already from the way he read her ledger, but which was different when applied to this. She looked at the letter. She thought about Crispin Gale standing at the garden wall in the evening light, with his arms at his sides for once. Not crossed, not defended. And the hills going gold behind him. And the way he had said you would have found it with a certainty that was not kindness, but conviction. She thought about the fence. About him setting posts alone since August in the rain. She thought about the word like. Her word, in her letter. I would like to tell you. She had looked at it before she sent it and called it by its right name. This is not practical. This is personal. I am sending it anyway. And she had sent it, and now here was his letter with the same structure, the same honesty in the second half. And she was sitting in Lady Dunmore's library with her ledger open, and Lord Ferris of Perthshire apparently waiting in the wings, and she was furious was perhaps too strong. She was frustrated with herself for the very clear, very specific reason that she had constructed her manageable life with considerable effort over 3 years, and it had been a good construction, and it had held, and she had been proud of its holding, and now she was sitting in a library in the Scottish Highlands, reading a letter from a man she had known for 36 hours, and feeling the walls of it in a way she had not felt in a very long time. Cages were comfortable when you built them yourself. That was the point of building them yourself. You knew the dimensions. You didn't bruise yourself against the bars because you knew exactly where the bars were. She put the letter down. She picked up her pen. She wrote the practical response first, told him she would document exactly as he advised, told him she had already written to her solicitor in London to request the original receipt files, the ones that should correspond to the cut pages, told him she thought the brother Reginald Vane of Shrewsbury, a man of regular expenses and irregular income, was the most likely source, and that she had enough now for a formal confrontation. She read it back. It was good. It was complete. It would have been sufficient. She thought about him standing in the field with the fence posts, 3 days alone, and the hawk on the ridge, and the way his letter had not been sufficient either, and he had known it and written the second half anyway. She dipped her pen. The house at Dunmore is comfortable, and Lady Dunmore is kind, and I am being introduced to Lord Ferris of Perthshire at a dinner on Friday, which I mention not because it is relevant to anything, but because I find, inexplicably, that I would like you to know it. The hills here are extraordinary. I suspect you know this, having lived among them, but they bear mentioning. I have been thinking about Kinlochmore, about the bones of it. I think it will be a very fine house again when the work is finished. I think you will finish it. These are also less defensible statements, and I am making them regardless. See Vane. She folded it before she could revise it, sealed it, set it on the corner of the desk for the afternoon post. Then she sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the hills through the library window, and thought about Lord Ferris, and about manageable lives, and about the very specific, very inconvenient feeling of a bar she had put in place herself, pressing back against her. She had told him about Lord Ferris. She had not been able to not tell him. That, she thought, was either extremely foolish or the first honest thing she had done about this in 4 days. She picked up her ledger and went back to the November entry because the work was still there and still mattered, and because she had learned long ago that feelings did not stop requiring you to do the practical things, and the practical things were always, regardless of everything else, where you started. But her eyes went to the hills again. She let them. The dinner was on Friday. Lord Ferris was exactly as described, 53, steady, with excellent property in Perthshire, and the careful attentiveness of a man who had decided what he wanted and was going about acquiring it methodically. He was not unpleasant. He was not unkind. He spoke well of his late wife, which she credited him for, and he asked intelligent questions about her time in the Highlands, and he had clearly been told about her facility with figures because he raised it with the deliberate casualness of a man deploying a compliment he had prepared. "Lady Dunmore tells me you managed your late husband's estate," he said, over the fish course. "I manage it still," she said. "There are some outstanding matters." "Admirable," he said, and smiled, and she understood from the smile that what he meant was how useful this quality would be, properly directed. She held her wine glass and smiled back and thought about a man who had said you would have found it with complete conviction, and then looked at the fire. She got through the dinner. Afterward, in the carriage back to Dunmore House, Lady Dunmore said, "He likes you very much. I could see it." "He was very pleasant," Cecily said. "He would be generous, I think. And the Perthshire house is beautiful. I've seen it. You would want for nothing." Cecily looked at the dark hills passing outside the window. The moon was up, and the hills were silver and enormous, and she thought about £30 and a fence line and a house with kitchen vegetables where the roses used to be, and a man who had looked at her once with an expression she still could not fully name. "I know," she said. Lady Dunmore patted her hand. "Think about it, dear. That is all I ask." She was already thinking about it. That was the problem. She was thinking about all of it, and Lord Ferris was barely in the picture. Chapter 8. He read the letter on a Tuesday. He had been meaning to read it since it arrived on Monday, which meant he had been carrying it in his coat pocket for a day and a half while he repaired guttering and argued with Alasdair's latest letter from Edinburgh about whether the South Field could wait until spring, which it could not, and attended to 12 other things that required attending to, and which he had attended to with perfect competence while being entirely aware of the letter. He read it at the kitchen table after supper, with Mrs. Gillies pointedly absent, in the manner of a man who had decided to be deliberate about the thing rather than pretend it was not happening. He read the practical section. It was good. She had moved quickly. She had the solicitor in motion. She had identified Reginald Vane as the likely source with the particular certainty of a woman who had been living with the problem long enough to know the shape of it. He noted it. He moved on. The house at Dunmore is comfortable, and Lady Dunmore is kind, and I am being introduced to Lord Ferris of Perthshire at a dinner on Friday, which I mention not because it is relevant to anything, but because I find, inexplicably, that I would like you to know it. He stopped. He read it again. Lord Ferris of Perthshire was 51 years old. Crispin knew of him distantly, as one knew of most of the significant landowners in the region, with an estate of some 4,000 acres and a reputation for steady, careful management. He had been widowed 2 years prior. He was, by all accounts, exactly the kind of man that sensible people recommended to widows of moderate means who needed the situation resolved. Crispin put the letter down on the table. He picked it up. He looked at the sentence again. "I find, inexplicably, that I would like you to know it." She had told him. She had written it down and sent it, with the specific phrasing of someone doing a thing they could not entirely account for and were being honest about not accounting for. She had told him about Lord Ferris the same way she had told him about the cut pages, directly, without softening, because she had decided he was worth the honesty. He was aware, with complete precision, of what he was feeling. He had catalogued too many things too carefully over too many years to fail to name it now, and it had a name, and the name was entirely straightforward, and it was making it very difficult to look at the rest of the letter. He looked at the rest of the letter. "The hills here are extraordinary. I suspect you know this, having lived among them, but they bear mentioning. I have been thinking about Kinlochmore, about the bones of it. I think it will be a very fine house again when the work is finished. I think you will finish it. These are also less defensible statements, and I am making them regardless." He sat with this for what was probably too long. She thought he would finish it. Not, "I hope you manage it," or "I'm sure it will come right," the way people said those things, meaning nothing in particular. She thought he would finish it the way she thought her own recoveries were possible, as a conclusion drawn from evidence. She had looked at Kinlochmore and read it the way she read ledgers and arrived at, He will finish it. He stood up, walked to the window, looked at the dark shape of the hillside and the stars above the ridge. Lord Ferris of Perthshire. He was being honest with himself, and so he continued being honest. What he felt was not abstract. It was specific. It was the specific, unwelcome, entirely recognizable feeling of a man who has understood too late that something matters to him and is watching it become available to someone else. He knew this feeling. He had felt its distant cousin when his father died, and Kinlochmore had seemed briefly, in that first terrible month, like something that could not be saved. The specific quality of, "This is mine, and I'm about to lose it, and there is nothing I have done to prevent it, because I did not admit in time that I wanted to keep it." He had not lost Kinlochmore. He had decided to keep it, and then done everything required to keep it, and it had cost him considerably, and he had not, for one day, regretted the cost. He looked at the hillside. She was 3 miles away at Dunmore House, being introduced to a perfectly adequate man with 4,000 acres. He had 2 things: a house he was in the process of saving, and approximately nothing else. His finances were the ongoing project of his life. He had no business. None. Not the slightest rational basis for entertaining the thought that was currently occupying the entire space where his useful categories used to be. He was also, and this was the part that was new, not particularly interested in whether he had rational basis. That was new. He had built his entire adult life on rational basis. Rational basis was how the roof still stood. Rational basis was how Alasdair had been through university, and how the east wing was sound, and how the fence line now had 43 straight posts in it. He believed in rational basis the way other men believed in luck or prayer, as the organizing principle, the thing that made the rest possible. And he was standing at his kitchen window at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night, having just read a letter from a woman he had known for 36 hours, feeling something that had no rational basis whatsoever, and finding, for the first time he could clearly remember, that he did not want to argue it into a different category. He wanted her to come back to Kinlochmore. He put it plainly, because he was a man who put things plainly. He wanted her to walk through that door again, to sit at the kitchen table and wrap her hands around tea and frown at figures and say precise, true things in her precise, true voice. He wanted to show her the South Field. He had an actual plan for the South Field now, and he had been developing it all week, and he had not asked himself why he kept thinking about explaining it to her specifically. He wanted to take her to the ridge above the north pasture at the particular time of morning when the light came in at an angle that made the whole valley look like it had been placed there for exactly that purpose. He wanted Lord Ferris of Perthshire to be in Perthshire. He sat back down at the table. He picked up his pen. He wrote quickly, because when he thought about it too carefully, he adjusted things out of truth and into palatability, and this was not a moment for palatability. "Mrs. Vane," the advice ray, "the brother stands. Move on Reginald Vane once you have the witness secured. Don't approach him directly. Go through your solicitor. A man who cuts pages from a ledger will not respond well to direct confrontation, and may destroy remaining evidence. I know Lord Ferris by reputation. He is considered steady and fair. I find I have very little to say about this that is either practical or reasonable, and so I will say only, I read your letter 3 times before supper, and once more after, and I thought about Dunmore House, and about whether you were sitting in it finding it sufficient, and I thought about the hills, and whether you were looking at them. I would like you to come back to Kinlochmore. There is no practical argument for this request, and I am making it regardless. I want to show you the valley from the North Ridge at first light. I want to tell you about the South Field. These are not defensible wants, and they are the most honest things I have written in several years. If Lord Ferris is what you need, then that is what matters. But I would like you to know, before Friday, that there is a man 3 miles from Dunmore House who has been thinking about you every day since you walked the north path, and who would like very much to know what you think of the hills in the morning. C. Gale. He read it once. He folded it before the part of his mind that managed things could produce an objection, and he sealed it, and he addressed it to Dunmore House. He set it on the hall table. He stood in the hall for a moment in the dark, in the cold stone house he had been keeping alive for 6 years, and he thought about the bones of it, her words, her assessment, and he thought about what it would mean for those bones to be seen every day by someone who read them clearly and who did not require the structure to be finished before she found it worth occupying. He went to bed. He did not sleep particularly well, but this time it was not from the weight of anything. It was from the particular, unfamiliar, slightly vertiginous feeling of having put something down. He had been carrying things alone for a long time. He was not, it turned out, entirely opposed to being done with it. Chapter 9. The letter arrived on Friday morning, 4 hours before the dinner. She was in the library with her ledger and her 3rd cup of tea when the footman brought it in, and she knew the hand before he had fully set the tray down. She waited until he had left. She looked at the envelope for a moment, the way she had looked at the cut pages in the bothy window, taking a breath before the evidence. She opened it. She read the practical section twice, because it was good and she needed it. The advice about Reginald was correct. She had already written to her solicitor, but she had been considering approaching Edmund's brother directly. The clean confrontation of it, and she could see now why that would be wrong. A man who had cut pages from a ledger and stolen quietly for 3 years would not respond to directness. He would respond by disappearing what remained. Then she read the second half. I read your letter 3 times before supper and once more after. She stopped. She put the letter in her lap and looked at the hills through the library window. The morning light was doing something extravagant with the clouds, shafts of it falling across the valley in long columns, and she thought about 3 miles, about how 3 miles was not very far at all in terms of actual distance, and about how she had been sitting in this library for a week now, making it feel like something much larger. She picked the letter back up. I want to show you the valley from the north ridge at first light. I want to tell you about the south field. These are not defensible wants, and they are the most honest things I have written in several years. She read that sentence twice. The most honest things I have written in several years. She thought about what it cost a man like Crispin Gale to write that sentence. A man who had categorized and managed and kept things in their correct places for 6 years, who spoke in flat declaratives and held himself like a house bearing its own load. She knew what it cost him, because she knew the equivalent cost in herself. The effort of keeping the ledger locked, the deliberate maintenance of a life that asked nothing of anyone, and therefore could not be taken from her. She had told him about Lord Ferris. She had not been able to not tell him, and she had known, when she sent the letter, what that meant. She looked at the last paragraph. If Lord Ferris is what you need, then that is what matters. But I would like you to know, before Friday, that there is a man 3 miles from Dunmore House who has been thinking about you every day since you walked the north path, and who would like very much to know what you think of the hills in the morning. She sat very still. She had been a widow for 3 years. She had been careful and practical, and she had rebuilt her life into something that worked, something that did not ask too much or offer too much, or leave her exposed to the particular damage of wanting something she could not keep. She had looked at Lord Ferris across the dinner table on a previous occasion. Not this Friday's dinner. There had been a luncheon the week before. She had not mentioned it in her letters, and she had thought, this is fine. This is safe. This is the kind of life that does not break. She had been correct. It would not break. She folded Crispin's letter and held it in both hands and thought about all the things that did not break, that held their shape, because nothing was ever pressed against them hard enough to test the structure. She thought about Kinlochmore, which had been pressed very hard indeed for a very long time, and which was still standing, and which she had looked at from the ridge and felt something she had not felt about a house or a life or a man in 3 years. She thought about the north path and the gold evening light and the moment at the garden wall when his arms had been at his sides for once. She thought about, you would have found it. She thought, I am 31 years old, and I have been choosing safe for 3 years, and it has preserved me, and it has cost me something I have not been looking at directly. She looked at it directly. Then she stood up, straightened her dress, and went to find Lady Dunmore. Lady Dunmore was in the morning room with her correspondence, a spaniel at her feet, and a second spaniel attempting to join the first. I need to tell you something, Cecily said, and I am going to be direct about it, because I think you deserve directness. Lady Dunmore set down her letter. She had the expression of a woman who had been expecting something of this nature, and had mixed feelings about being right. I am not going to the dinner tonight, Cecily said. I am not going to marry Lord Ferris. I am not. She stopped, started again. I have received a letter from Mr. Gale of Kinlochmore. A pause. Crispin Gale, Lady Dunmore said. Yes. A longer pause. The spaniel changed position. His estate is in some difficulty, Lady Dunmore said carefully. I know. He is not, Cecily. He is not what I would have chosen for you. No, Cecily agreed. I know that too. Lady Dunmore looked at her with the expression of a woman performing a rapid series of calculations. What has he said in this letter? Cecily thought about the most honest things I have written in several years. He has asked me to come back to Kinlochmore. He wants to show me the valley at first light. She paused. He has also told me what he thinks of the hills in the morning, which turns out to be the right question. Lady Dunmore absorbed this. She looked, Cecily thought, like a woman who had opinions about the situation and was determining which of them were actually useful. He is a good man, Lady Dunmore said, finally, with the tone of someone conceding a point they had been holding in reserve. He has done what he has done with that estate since his father. It has not been easy, and he has not complained, not once. And there are men in this county who would have sold and been comfortable, and he has not. A pause. He has not asked anyone for anything in 6 years. I know, Cecily said. And he has asked you? Yes. Lady Dunmore looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, with the resignation of a woman closing a ledger she had been hoping would balance differently, Take the carriage. Donald knows the Kinlochmore road. She told Donald where they were going, and she sat back against the carriage cushions and watched the hills through the window and did not try to think herself out of it. She had been thinking herself out of things for 3 years, and she knew exactly where it led, to a locked satchel and a manageable life, and the bars of a cage she had built herself pressing back against her in a library in the Highlands, while the hills did something extraordinary with the light outside. She was not frightened. She examined this and found it true. She was not frightened of Crispin Gale or of Kinlochmore, or of a man who had rebuilt a failing estate with his own hands and kept his family together and set fence posts alone in the rain, and written her the most honest letter she had received in several years. She was frightened, a little, of wanting something this much, but she had decided, somewhere between the library and the morning room, that frightened was not the same as wrong, and that the difference mattered. The carriage turned onto the Kinlochmore Drive. The house came into view. Pale grey stone in the afternoon light, the kitchen vegetables, the patched roof, the portico columns he had repointed himself. She looked at all of it, the way she had looked from the ridge, and felt the same thing she had felt then, something that recognized itself. The carriage stopped. She got out before Donald could set the step. He was at the door. He had heard the carriage, she supposed, or Mrs. Gillies had seen it from a window, because he was standing in the doorway of Kinlochmore with his coat still on and the expression of a man who had written a very honest letter and was now face to face with the consequence of having sent it. She stopped on the gravel a few feet away. They looked at each other. "You didn't go to the dinner," he said. "No." "Lord Ferris is in Perthshire," she said, "which is where he should be." Something moved in his face. Not the almost smile, not the fractional shift she had learned to watch for. Something larger than that, something that didn't need her to look closely to catch. "The Southfield," she said. "You wanted to tell me about the Southfield?" A pause. She saw him recalibrate, the move from braced to something else. Something that was perhaps the specific look of a man who had been carrying things alone long enough that being met felt, briefly, like being surprised by solid ground. "I have a plan," he said, "for the drainage. I thought you might." He looked at her for a moment. "Come inside." "In a moment," she said. She looked at the house, the whole of it, the bones of it in the afternoon light. "I want to look at it for another moment." He stepped out of the doorway and came to stand beside her. Not touching, just beside, close enough that she was aware of the warmth of him and the particular stillness of him, the way he occupied space without requiring it to adjust. They stood and looked at Kinlochmore together. "The slate's on the east wing," she said. "What are you using for the replacement?" "Ballachulish. There's a quarry 3 miles north that supplies—" "Good match?" "Close enough." He paused. "Better than the mortar." "The mortar was a good match." "You said?" "I meant it." A silence. The kind that had stopped feeling like withholding a week ago and had never gone back. She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her, not with the cataloguing attention she had first noticed on the path, the assessment of a man who sorted information into useful and not useful. Something different. The look of a man who had stopped sorting entirely, at least for this moment, and was simply looking. "The ridge at first light," she said. "You still want to show me?" "Yes." "Tomorrow, then." Something in his expression settled. Not relief exactly, but the absence of a tension that had been there a long time. "Tomorrow," he said. She turned back to the house. "Come inside," he said again, and this time it was not an instruction. It was an invitation, quietly offered, in the voice of a man who had spent 6 years managing a threshold and was, with full knowledge of what it meant, stepping back from it. She went inside. Chapter 10. He had not slept. This was not unusual. He had not slept well in 6 years, for reasons that were entirely practical. The list that lived in his head did not stop at nightfall. But this was different. This was the particular wakefulness of a man who had something to look forward to, which was a feeling he had not had in long enough that it had taken him an embarrassingly long time to identify it. She was in the east bedroom. Mrs. Gillies had made it up without being asked, and had installed herself in the adjoining room with the satisfied air of a housekeeper, ensuring all proprieties were observed, which told him everything about Mrs. Gillies's opinion of the situation. Cecily had gone up after supper. They had eaten in the kitchen, all three of them, with the ease of people who had dispensed with ceremony without deciding to, and he had sat at the table for an hour afterward, with the Southfield plan spread out before him, and not looked at it once. He had been listening to the house. Kinlochmore had a particular sound at night, the settling of old stone, the wind off the ridge finding the gaps it knew, the creak of the staircase at the third step. He knew all of it. He had learned it in the long first year after his father died, lying awake cataloguing what needed doing, and it had become over time less like inventory and more like company. The sounds of a house that was still there, still holding, still his. He heard her cross the room above him, once to the window, then back to the bed, then silence. He looked at the Southfield plan. He thought about showing it to her, about spreading it across the kitchen table and watching her eyes move across it the way they moved across ledger columns. Quick, specific, finding the thing that mattered. He thought about what she would say. He thought she would find the flaw he had not been able to locate, the thing that wasn't quite right in the drainage calculation, because she would look at it differently and she would not tell him he was wrong without being certain. And she would be correct. He thought about having someone who would be correct at him for the foreseeable future. He went to sleep at some point after midnight, which was more than he'd expected, and he was awake again before 5 with the particular wakefulness of a man who has decided the day matters. He knocked on her door at 5:30. She opened it before the second knock, already dressed, already holding her satchel. Because of course she was already holding her satchel. She was a woman who moved through the world in a state of permanent readiness, and he was beginning to understand that this was not anxious preparation, but a kind of freedom, the freedom of someone who could leave at any moment, and had therefore chosen, when she stayed, deliberately. She had chosen yesterday, deliberately. "The light won't hold long," he said. "I know." She looked at him. Lead. They went out through the kitchen garden, the brassicas dark and heavy with dew, the air carrying the particular cold of a Highland morning, the kind that tasted of water and stone, and up through the north wood on the deer track, the same track he had brought her down a week ago in the rain. It was different in the dark before dawn, quieter, the trees holding their breath, and she walked behind him on the narrow path without complaint and without asking how far, which he had noted about her from the beginning. She did not ask how far. She simply walked. The ridge came up through the trees, and then they were on it, the open hillside dropping away below them, and the valley spreading out in the last of the dark. The loch at the far end, holding what remained of the stars, the patchwork of field and forest, and the stone walls running up the hillside slopes. And in the east, the sky beginning to do what it did here at this hour, which was the reason he had wanted to show her. She stopped beside him. He watched the sky instead of her face for approximately 30 seconds. Then he looked at her face. She was looking at the valley with her chin raised and the cold turning her breath to mist, and her expression was the one he had seen in the bothy when she understood about the cut pages. Not surprise, but recognition. The expression of someone seeing something they had suspected but not confirmed. She had suspected the hills would do this. She had written about them in her letter, had mentioned them twice now, and he understood suddenly that she had been looking at them from the Dunmore windows and knowing they were the near edge of something she had not yet seen fully. He had wanted to be the one to show her the full thing. He had not examined why until this moment. The light came. It came the way it always came here. Not gradually, not as dawn approached in gentle increments, but as a decision, the sun breaching the eastern ridge in a single moment and throwing light across the entire valley at a low angle that turned everything it touched to gold. The loch went from black to copper. The stone walls lit up white on their eastern faces. The fields came up green and amber in long alternating strips, and the hills beyond went purple, and then pink, and then a colour he had never been able to name, the colour of Highland morning that existed only here for perhaps 20 minutes before the light moved. She exhaled. He heard it, the soft sound of someone setting something down, and he understood, without needing to ask, what it was. The same thing he had set down, in the hall, in the dark, the night after he sent the letter. The weight of keeping something at a careful distance. They stood in the light together. "Crispin," she said. It was the first time she had used his name. He had been aware, all week, of her not using it. Not from coldness, but from the same deliberateness with which she did everything. And he had been aware of the space where it would go when she finally did. And now she had, and it landed exactly where he had known it would, in the specific place beneath his sternum that he had been telling himself for a week was not waiting for anything. "The South Field," he said. Because he was still himself, even here, even now, and what he meant was, "I want you to stay. I want to show you everything. I want to tell you every plan and hear what you find in it." She turned to look at him. "Tell me," she said. He told her. He told her about the drainage problem, the way the water sat in the northeast corner after heavy rain, and the damage it was doing to the soil composition, and the plan he had for a secondary channel running down to the burn. He told her about the cost estimate, and where he had arrived at figures, and where he was not certain. He told her about the spring, which was when he needed to begin if the channel was going to be ready for next winter's rain. She listened. She was looking at the valley below, at the southeast corner where the field in question sat. And she was doing the thing with her eyes, where she tracked across a space the way she tracked across columns. Then she said, "Your channel gradient." "Yes. If the channel runs straight to the burn, it'll move too fast and cut the bank. You need a slight curve at the lower end. Slows the flow, keeps the bank intact." He looked at the field. He had known, without knowing he knew, that the calculation was not quite right. "Yes," he said. "Add perhaps 12 feet to the length. The cost difference is minimal." "I know." She looked at him. "You already knew." "I suspected. I wanted to hear you say it." A pause. He heard it as he said it, the honest undercurrent of it, that he had wanted her specifically, her specific voice saying the specific right thing, and that this was no longer something he was filing away. Her expression did something he had not seen before. Not the suppressed smile, not the ledger focus, not the look of someone who has decided to be honest. Something more open than all of those. Something that cost her the same way the second half of his letter had cost him. 12 feet, she said, and her voice was not quite steady, and they both knew it was not about the drainage channel. He looked at her. The light was still doing its 20 minutes of impossible gold across the valley, and she was standing in it, with her satchel over her shoulder and her chin level and her eyes on him. And he thought about the list in his head, the long list, the one that never stopped. And he thought that there was one thing on it he had not yet attended to, one thing he had been meaning to say since a bothy in the rain, and that he was done with the category system, and done with palatability, and done with setting things in the correct place and leaving them there. He crossed the 2 feet between them. He took her face in both hands with the care of a man handling something that mattered, and she looked up at him and did not step back. And he said, "I would like to ask you something." "Ask," she said. "Stay," he said. "Not the morning. Not the autumn. Stay." She looked at him for a long moment. The valley spread out behind her in the gold light. Kinlochmore's roof visible on the slope below, the kitchen garden, the patched slates, all of it still standing. All of it held. "The ledger," she said. "I know." "Reginald Vane. I know. The house in England that I am trying not to lose." "I know all of it," he said. "I am asking regardless." She looked at him, and he looked back, and the thing that passed between them in that moment was not a negotiation and not a concession, but the specific, quiet recognition of two people who had been managing alone for long enough to know the difference between a life that held and a life that was worth the holding. She placed one hand flat against his chest, over his coat, over the pocket where he had carried her first letter for a day and a half without reading it. "Yes," she said. He kissed her. Not quickly, not in the manner of a man who had been waiting too long and had forgotten patience, but with the deliberate care of someone who understood that the best things required the same attention as everything else that mattered. Her hand stayed flat against his chest, and he felt it the whole time, the specific warmth of it, the specific weight. When he stepped back, she was looking at him with an expression that was not the suppressed smile, and was not the ledger focus, and was not any of the expressions he had catalogued. It was new. He thought he would need the rest of his life to learn it properly. He thought he was entirely prepared to do that. "The South Field," she said, after a moment. "Yes." "Show me the site. I want to see where the channel would run." He looked at her. "Now." "You said the light won't hold." He looked at the valley, at the light that had another 10 minutes in it before it lifted and became ordinary. He looked at her. "Come on then," he said. He took her hand. The first time, simply and without ceremony, his hand around hers, and they went down the ridge together toward the field, and behind them, Kinlochmore held its ground in the morning light, as it had always held it. And now, for the first time in 6 years, he did not feel the weight of it alone. Chapter 11. He was at the carriage. She had not asked him. She had come downstairs on the morning of her departure with her trunk packed and her satchel locked and her solicitor's letter in her coat pocket. And she had said goodbye to Mrs. Gillies, who had pressed a cloth package of oatcakes into her hands and said nothing but looked a great deal. And she had walked out the front door of Kinlochmore into a grey October morning. He was standing by the carriage in his travelling coat with a bag already loaded, talking to Donald in the unhurried way of a man who has settled a question and is now attending to logistics. He looked up when she came out. She looked at him. She looked at the bag. She looked at him again. "The solicitor appointment is Thursday," she said. "I know. You told me. It's in Shrewsbury." "I know where Shrewsbury is." She considered him for a moment. There was no performance in his standing there, no grand gesture, no announcement of intent. He had simply done the thing, and he was waiting to see if she would object, and she could see in the set of him that he was prepared to hear either answer. "You don't need to come," she said. Not as a discouragement, as an offering. The same kind she made with everything, the door held open, no obligation to walk through. "I know," he said, exactly as he had said it on the ridge. "I know all of it. I am asking regardless. Except inverted now, not asking, coming. Same principle." She looked at him for one more moment. Then she said, The carriage is narrow. I've been in narrow carriages. You take up rather a lot of space. Something shifted in his expression. That almost smile she had been watching for since chapter 1, the one he kept catching before it arrived, except this time he did not catch it in time. It was brief, and it was real, and it was the most unguarded thing she had seen on his face, and she filed it somewhere that was not a ledger, and was not a category, and had no lock. She got into the carriage. He got in after her. The carriage was narrow. He took up rather a lot of space. She opened her satchel and took out the ledger. He looked out the window as the drive fell away behind them, his arm along the back of the seat. Not around her, simply there. Available? And she was aware of it the way she had been aware of his hand on her face on the ridge, the specific warmth and weight of it. She looked at the ledger. She looked at the arm. She went back to the ledger. They stopped in Carlisle for the night, which was practical and ordinary, and required 2 separate rooms at the inn, which were obtained without discussion and occupied without drama. He ate supper across from her in the inn's small dining room, and they talked about Reginald Vane. She had met Edmund's brother 6 times in the course of her marriage and twice since the funeral. She had not liked him either time, though she had been honest with herself that disliking someone was not the same as them being guilty of anything, and she had held the distinction carefully. He was a man of easy manner and restless expense, who spoke about money the way people spoke about weather, as a force that acted upon him, never as a thing he acted upon. Edmund had found him charming and exhausting in equal measure. Cecily had found him exhausting. "He will deny it," she said, over the fish course. "Categorically, from the first moment. He won't wait to hear what I have." "What do you have?" She laid it out. The 4 entries across 4 years, the pattern of amounts, the November 1815 entry 5 months after Edmund's death. That was the one that made it unambiguous, because it had no relationship to anything Edmund had authorized. The cut pages, the missing receipt numbers, her solicitor's letter, which confirmed that the corresponding receipt files had never existed in the official estate records, meaning they had been fabricated and then destroyed. "The solicitor will present it," she said. "I'll be in the room. I don't—" She stopped. "I have not decided whether to speak or to let the solicitor manage it entirely." He was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to do?" She looked at him. "I want to look him in the eye when he understands that I found it." A pause. "Then do that." It may not serve the legal case to have me speak." "It will serve you," he said flatly. "The legal case will hold with or without your voice in the room. You have been looking for this for 3 years. You should be present for what it means." She looked at him across the small table in the Carlisle Inn with the candle between them, and thought about 3 years of the locked ledger and the careful life and the list of things she had not allowed herself, and she thought about what it meant to be told, by someone who understood the cost of things, that the thing she wanted was worth the wanting. "Yes," she said, "I'm going to speak." He picked up his wine. "Good." Shrewsbury was 3 more days. 3 days in a carriage with a man who had decided, apparently, that the enforced proximity of travel was an appropriate occasion for becoming gradually, incrementally more present. Not demonstrably, nothing she could point to and name, but she was aware of it the way she was aware of weather changing. By the 2nd day he was reading alongside her, his shoulder against hers, occasionally asking about something in the ledger in the way of someone who had moved past the threshold of permission and was simply there. By the 3rd day she had fallen asleep against his arm somewhere in Cheshire, and woken to find he had not moved and her satchel had been closed and set on the seat beside her, and she had no idea when he had done it. She did not ask. She knew the answer. He had done it because it needed doing, and because it was his to do now, and that was the whole of his reasoning. She had understood by the second morning that she was going to spend her life watching this man do things quietly and without announcement, and feeling the specific, accumulated warmth of it, the way a house felt, the accumulated warmth of a fire that had been burning a long time. She found she had no objections to this whatsoever. Reginald Vane's house in Shrewsbury was a Georgian terrace that had been maintained with the haphazard attention of a man who spent money on comfort and not on structure. The steps needed repointing. Cecily noticed this. She did not think it was an accident that she noticed it. Her solicitor, Mr. Crane, was waiting on the pavement. He was a small, precise man who had been managing the remains of Edmund's estate with the expression of someone diffusing a complicated device, and he looked at Crispin with the careful neutrality of a professional who had learned to withhold assessment until he had more information. "Mr. Gale will be accompanying us," Cecily said. Mr. Crane looked at Crispin. Crispin looked back. Some form of communication occurred that she was not party to and did not need to be. "Very good," Mr. Crane said. Reginald Vane received them in his study, which was cluttered and warm and smelled of tobacco and the particular financial anxiety of a man who has been spending above his means long enough for it to have become atmospheric. He was 44, handsome in a way that had become soft, with the easy confidence of someone who had never expected to be held accountable for anything and had been correct in this expectation for most of his adult life. He looked at Cecily with the particular warmth of a man who did not take her seriously and was therefore not afraid of her. He did not look at Crispin at all, which was the second mistake he made, the first being opening the door. Mr. Crane laid it out. The 4 entries, the pattern, the November payment 5 months after Edmund's death, the one that required access to an estate no longer in Reginald's name, the one that could only have been made by someone who had kept a key and used it after the funeral, the cut pages, the missing receipts, the testimony of Mr. Crane himself, who had been present at the estate handover and could confirm that the ledger had been intact at that date. Reginald Vane denied it, categorically from the first moment, exactly as she had predicted. He was shocked. He was offended. He was... She watched him reach for each register in turn, hurt, then incredulous, then beginning to build toward injured dignity, which was the one she had seen him use most effectively before. She said, "Reginald." He stopped. She held the ledger up. She turned to the page she had marked. She pointed to the entry in November 1815, and she said, "This is your handwriting." He looked at it. She watched him look at it and understand, in the space of approximately 4 seconds, that she had known all along and had simply been waiting until she could prove it. She watched the injured dignity dismantle itself. She watched him try to find the angle that was left. There was not one. "The total," she said, "is £151. Across 4 years. I would like it returned, with interest calculated from the date of each withdrawal, and I would like the cut pages replaced with accurate entries that reflect where the money actually went." She paused. "If you do this without litigation, Mr. Crane has prepared the relevant paperwork today. If you do not, we will proceed through the courts, which will cost you considerably more and will make public the nature of the withdrawals." A silence. "This is my late husband's estate," she said, and her voice was quite steady, steadier than she had expected, because she was angry, and she had always been better under anger than under grief, "which I have been managing alone for 3 years. and I have found every penny of this, and I can find the rest if there is any. I would recommend, she said, that there not be any. Reginald looked at her. He looked at Mr. Crane. He looked, finally, at Crispin, who had not spoken a single word and had not needed to, who had been standing slightly to her left since they entered the room with the particular stillness of a man who was present as a fact and not a threat, which was more effective than any threat. "I'll need a few days," Reginald said. "You have one," she said. "Mr. Crane will be at his office tomorrow morning at 10. She stood. She picked up her satchel. She walked out of Reginald Vane's study and through his entrance hall and out the front door into the Shrewsbury afternoon. And she stood on the pavement in the cold, with her hands not quite steady and the specific tremor of someone who has been carrying something for 3 years and has just, finally, set it down. She heard the door behind her. Crispin came to stand beside her, not touching, just beside, close enough that she was aware of him, the warmth and weight of him, the same way she had been aware of it on the ridge. "The steps need repointing," he said. She looked at the steps. She let out a breath that turned into something that was almost a laugh, small and slightly undone. "I noticed. Shoddy work. Dreadful." He said nothing for a moment. She felt him look at her. "You were right to speak," he said. "I know." She looked at the street, the ordinary Shrewsbury afternoon, the people going about their business in the cold. "I needed to be in the room when he understood." "I know." She turned to look at him. He was watching her with the expression she had no name for yet, the one she was going to spend the rest of her life learning. And she thought about Kinlochmore, and the South Field, and the valley in the morning light, and the fact that none of it was manageable, and none of it was safe, and all of it was exactly what she had been arguing herself away from for 3 years. She had stopped arguing. "Take me home," she said. He looked at her. She watched him receive the word, home, and file it, for once, in exactly the right place. "Yes," he said. He offered her his arm. She took it. They walked down the Shrewsbury street together into the October afternoon, toward the carriage and the long road north, toward the pale grey house on the Highland slope, with the kitchen vegetables and the patched roof and the bones of something that was going to be. She believed this with the certainty she brought to all her conclusions. Very fine indeed. Chapter 12. The first snow came in November. Crispin woke to it. Not to the sound of it. Snow arrived without sound, but to the particular quality of light that came through the curtains when the ground was white. He had known that light his whole life. It was the light of Kinlochmore in winter, the closed-in, sufficient light of a house that had weathered every November it had been asked to weather, and would weather this one too. He lay still for a moment and listened to the house. She was already awake in the room below. He could hear it in the way Kinlochmore's sounds shifted when she was moving about. The particular creak of the kitchen floorboard, the soft sounds of a woman whose mind started before the rest of her was prepared to admit it. He had learned this in the 6 weeks since they had come back from Shrewsbury. He had learned a great many things in 6 weeks, most of them the kind that could not be catalogued. She had moved into Kinlochmore the way she moved through everything, without fuss, without requiring the house to rearrange itself, simply arriving and being there and then being there the next day as well, until her presence had become as much a part of the structure as the stone. Mrs. Gillies had said nothing and rearranged every cupboard in the kitchen within the first week, which was her version of celebration. Alice Dare had come from Edinburgh, taken one look at Cecily going over the estate accounts at the kitchen table, and said to Crispin quietly, in the hallway, "Where did you find her?" as though she were a thing that had been missing from the inventory and had finally been located. "She found me," Crispin had said, which was accurate. She had walked into him on a path in the rain, and he had never quite recovered his footing. He had not tried. He heard her on the stairs before she reached the kitchen. She appeared in the doorway already dressed, already thinking about something. He could tell by the line between her brows, the particular look of a woman whose mind had been running since before she was fully awake. "Snow," she said, settling across the kitchen table from him with her hands around the tea he'd already poured. "Yes." "How much?" "A few inches. The east track will be passable." A pause. "You've already looked." "I heard it stop at 4. She looked at him with the expression, the one he had been learning for 6 weeks, the one that was none of the expressions he had catalogued in the bothy and on the path and at the wall, the one that was specifically for him in the morning before either of them had spoken much. And she said, "The drainage channel. Will hold. The ground's frozen hard enough." "I know. I wanted to hear you say it." He looked at her. She was giving him back his own words. "I wanted to hear you say it." The thing he had said about the drainage calculation on the ridge, the honest undercurrent of it, the admission that he had wanted her voice specifically. She was giving it back to him in the specific tone of someone who had been holding it for 6 weeks and had decided this morning, in the snowlight, that it was the right moment. He understood, in that moment, what she was saying. Not about the drainage, about this. About lying in the grey light of a November morning in a house that was still in the process of being saved, and wanting the specific voice of the specific person beside him saying the specific right thing, and having it, and knowing he would have it tomorrow as well. He had been holding things for so long. He was a man who held. He had been holding since 23. The roof and the finances, and the list and the fence, and Alasdair's education, and the East Wing, and every last thing on the list that never got shorter. Held in his 2 hands, and managed, and kept upright. And he had been good at it. He had been very good at it. And he had not known, until she walked into him on the path in the rain, that holding was different from being held. She had not rescued him. He was clear on that. Kinlochmore was still the ongoing project of his life, and the list in his head was still long, and the Southfield drainage was still a spring undertaking, and there were still 30 things that required doing before the deep winter set in. Nothing had been solved by her arrival except the specific problem of managing it all without a single person who was on his side without condition. She was on his side without condition. He had not known he was carrying that absence until it was filled. "The slates," she said. "What about them?" "Ballachulish. You said the delivery was coming before the first snow." "Came yesterday." She turned her head. "Yesterday." "You were doing the accounts." "You should have told me." "You were doing the accounts," he said again, patient, and watched her decide whether to press the point and decide against it, because she knew, as he knew, that you were doing the accounts was his way of saying, "I did not want to interrupt you," which was his way of saying something he said better in actions than in words. She had learned this about him. She had been learning it since the bothy, the inverse relationship between what he said and what he meant. The way the more it mattered, the quieter he got about it. The way the things he felt most were the things he was most likely to communicate by closing a satchel and leaving it beside her while she slept. "You'll start on the east wing before the hard frost," she said. "Next week. I'll help." He looked at her. "You'll help." "I've been watching you patch mortar for 6 weeks. I know how to do it." "You've been watching from the window." I've been paying close attention from the window, she said. It's the same thing. It was not, in practical terms, the same thing. He was going to say this. He looked at her face, the precision of it, the complete and unblinking certainty of someone who had decided they were helping and had no intention of being argued out of it. And he thought about the bothy, about the moment she had shown him the cut pages without softening it, and about the way she had stood in his doorway after the Shrewsbury afternoon and said, "Take me home," as though it had always been home, and she had simply been delayed in arriving. "Fine," he said. "I'll need an old coat." "You can have mine." She looked at him. He looked back. The snowlight lay across the kitchen and the bare stone floors he had not yet replaced. And she was in his house, in his coat, metaphorically, and would be in it, literally, by Tuesday. And the list in his head was long, but it was no longer the only thing in the room. "Crispin?" she said. "I wrote to the solicitor about the house in England." He went still. He did not let it show in his face, but he felt it. The particular attention of a man receiving information he has been waiting for without letting himself wait for it. "The mortgage can be sold," she said carefully, "if the property is sold. I have been thinking about what I would do with the proceeds after the mortgage is discharged, and I have been thinking—" She stopped. He waited. She began again. "I have been thinking that the Ballachulish slates are not the last thing this roof needs, and the east wing is only the first project, and the south field drainage in spring will require materials." He looked at her. "These are not—" She met his eyes. "This is not charity. I am not. I have been looking at your books, with your knowledge, and I know what the estate needs, and I know what I have, and I know how to calculate the return on a sound investment. And Kinlochmore is a sound investment, and I would like—" Her voice was steady, but her hands on the blanket were not entirely still. The small tremor of someone saying the honest thing, the less defensible thing, and saying it anyway. "I would like to be part of finishing it." He looked at her for a long moment. She looked back. Direct, clear-eyed, with the expression of a woman who had made a calculation and was presenting her findings and was prepared to hear either answer. "This is your home," he said. "Yes." "Then it does not require. Cecily, everything that is Kinlochmore is already—" He stopped. He was better at this in letters. He tried again. "You do not need to purchase a share of your own house." She was quiet for a moment. He watched her take the full meaning of it. "Oh," she said, softly. "Everything," he said. "Slates and drainage and the east wing and the south field. All of it. It's already yours." Her hands, which had been wrapped around her tea, went still. He reached across the table and took one of them, simply, without ceremony, the way he had taken her hand on the ridge, and held it. And she looked down at their hands and then up at him, and the expression on her face was the one he had been learning since Shrewsbury, the one that was specifically for him. And this morning he thought he could see a little further into it than he had been able to yesterday. He thought he had the rest of his life to go further still. "The east wing," she said, after a moment. "Tuesday. I'll need the coat by Monday. I want to look at the roofline before we start." "You can have the coat tonight." She looked at him with something warm and precise and entirely herself. "You're very generous with your coats." "It's cold," he said. "It's practical." She made a sound that was, unmistakably, a laugh. Small and real, and the best sound in the room, in the house, in the whole cold white Highland morning. And he thought about every category he had ever maintained, Every careful filing of things into useful and not useful. Every piece of information he had sorted and stored and managed and held in the right place. And he thought that none of it, not one item on the long list, not the roof or the drainage or the finances or the fence, had ever felt like this. Like having his hands full of something worth carrying. Like knowing for the first time that he was not carrying it alone. Outside, the snow lay on Kinlochmore in the early light, on the patched slates and the kitchen garden and the fence line with its 43 straight posts. And the house held, as it had always held, and would go on holding. Only now it held more than stone. The end. Thank you for spending this time with us here at Romance Haven. If this story captured your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment sharing your favorite moment or character. Your support helps us bring more unforgettable romance stories to life. Until our next adventure, your escape into romance awaits. Happy listening.